Hola, hola. Hola, ¿qué tal? Bueno, empezamos, ¿no? Ya, porque vamos con un poco de retraso. A ver, en principio haremos la presentación en inglés. ¿Os va bien? O si hay alguna duda en algún momento, alguna cosa, pues lo traducimos, ¿vale? ¿Os parece bien? Pues, bueno, estamos aquí hoy con el dibujante Ken Niimura y el guionista Joe Kelly. Paso al inglés, ¿eh?
Hola.
Está presentando su nueva obra, Immortal Sargento Inmortal. Yo me había preparado una serie de preguntas, pero que me he dado cuenta que estaban todas respondidas al final del libro, en los extras. Pero bueno, para los que no se lo hayan leído, pues empezamos un poco hablando de esto. So, guys, this is your new book. And this book, as I was reading it, it was clear to me that since I knew that Joe, your father, was a cop, it seemed to me that it was probably a strong autobiographical vibe in there. So, to which extent is that true?
My father was a cop. He retired when I was still very young, but you leave the job, but the job does not leave you. So a lot of the emotional stuff in Immortal Sergeant is from my life. Some of the things that Sarge says, but not the worst things that he says, my father would have said. But the cop stories that he tells, there are stories that are told in the book. They were his stories. They were the stories that he told me over and over again.
So they're real.
They were supposedly real.
Okay.
And the same, actually, there's a story in there. I don't want to give anything away, but there's a story in there that the mother tells. My mother told that story, so that's also true. So there is a lot of autobiographical elements, but I never want people to think it's a direct memoir or anything like that.
And actually, to the point that one thing that surprised me when reading the extras at the end of the book, the epilogue, was that the main event, the main character's life, the thing that propels the whole story forward, is actually something that did happen. Actually, right? I don't know to which extent we can talk about it without giving it away. But
yeah, I mean, there's a crucial event in the story, and it's a dramatization of something that did actually happen that connected me and my father, and I didn't know about it until many years later in my life. So my relationship with my dad was it was good in many ways, but complicated in other ways. And he could be scary, and he could be tough, and but he could also be incredibly funny. So a lot of the story that I wanted to tell was me trying to make sense of that. And over the course of time, but it took me a very long time to even get near that. You know, my father passed away 15 years ago, and I kind of finally started writing the script 7 years ago, 6 years ago, maybe 5 years ago. So it took me a really long time. And I had the idea for the story even before that. So yeah, very personal. And luckily, Ken brought it to life and helped me, because of the way we work, really, took over the story where we became co-writers, essentially, because it was too close. And so to have Ken's expert eye and his storytelling made it easier for me to finally do.
That was the thing that I was going to ask. Because knowing that it was such a personal story for Joe, it must have been quite a challenge for Ken, to integrate that into your vision into the story and make it yours too, as an artist. Because we artists, we always come afterwards, usually when we're working with the writers. So we always have to find ways to make the story ours in order to live with it. So how was that process for you?
Yeah, so if I go, let's say, to the very, very beginning of everything, what I like or the kind of books or movies or anything I like are stories that are very personal, that really matter to the creator that made them. And also things where I don't know, like either I understand something about, let's say, human condition that I didn't know, or maybe I recognize something that I see myself, that's something I really like when it's going beyond, I don't know, time or space. Let's say, I think it's something that's really beautiful and really resonates with me. So we have been discussing for a long time, like, what should we do next? And there were tons of like different projects, but somehow, I don't know, among all the stories, like Immortal Sargent felt the most important for Joe. At the same time, the most difficult to write for, very obvious reasons. So on the one hand, I was like, this would be the one book I would like to write. And then on the other, as you say, it's very removed from anything I know. So it took me some time to understand the story. And since I'm drawing it, then I have to first understand it in order to be able to tell it to somebody else. And so the way we work is that, or at least for Sarge, everything was done pretty much at the same time. So storyboards, character design, and other things. And so one thing that I realized was that at first I'm very slow understanding things. So it took me a lot of time doing the storyboards. We did like a first version of the storyboard, exactly what Joe had on the paper as a storyboard. And then that's where I finally understood. It took me a lot of time to be like, oh, this is not a story about two characters that are equal. This is a story of like observing Sarge, the dad, from the point of view of the son. And so we, the readers, have to be in the point of view, look at everything from the kid's point of view, the son's point of view. And so one thing I did on the storyboards was I have like a caricature of myself, and I kind of drew that on the son's face. And I was like, this might help me get into from his point of view. And that, at the same time, informed the character design, where I was like, then we need to make like a very, very specific design for Sarge, so specific that it's difficult for you to identify with him. And then on the other way around, then we have to make a very, let's say, more standard character for the son in order for us to identify with him. And so it took us, it's on the back pages on the book, like tons of like different sketches to really get there. It was because we had Sarge, so the dad. So it was like, what do we put next to him that would look good? And we had tons of options out there. And at the very end, I came up with a character that looked like me, because I don't know why, but I was like, it's the only one way for me to understand and be able to tell the story. So we've been saying that in a way for Joe, since the writing of the script was very laborious and it took tons of effort, like he put it on paper, but he needed some distance to understand what was going on there beyond his emotions. And for me, it was the opposite thing, where I was like, I need to get closer to the story, and that the only one way I found was like, what if I draw a character that looks a little bit like me? And the other thing that happens that when I started drawing it, I still had straight hair. And then like during this is not a joke, during the making, maybe with COVID, I don't know, but it started getting curlier and it just stayed like that.
Are you showing off?
No.
Are you,
No, that's not it. No, but it was like,
talking too much about the hair.
I was like, I don't know what's going on. And then like, I look more like the character, which is like even more disgusting in a way. But anyway. So yeah, it was like the process of like being able to get into the skin of the character and be able to tell it that took me a lot of time. And it was like done in parallel between the storyboards and the character design at the same time.
But it was very important for me then, because it was so helpful to see the whole story again through Ken's eyes, because I wanted to put everything. Like, here's the 5 stories that my father always told me about crime, and I put those in it. And then Ken would be like, maybe 2's enough, or maybe 1, and he would start helping edit it. And it was really useful because he's a great writer in his own right. So he was editing as he was making the thing. And then I could see it as a story, not just as like, oh, here's all my guts, just like bleh. It really helped quite a bit.
So it kind of the story morphed as you both started collaborating. It was not the usual standard with American comics where you get the script and the artist then draws it, and then there's little or not as much communication between the.
Yeah, we did, because it's difficult in the sense that you're working with somebody and it's a very personal story. You don't know, it's personal. It's theirs. It's Joe's story. So I did a first version of the storyboards, 1-to-1, exactly what was on the page on the storyboard. And then I did a second one where I was like, I just like cut and paste and other scenes or saying like we could have a scene like this here, or take out speech balloons or anything that I don't know. It was just an idea of like, what if it looked like this? And so I sent Joe both versions, and I was like, I've done the very faithful one, and another one with just ideas. And it was like, it's up to you to choose whichever you feel more comfortable with, because it's not my role to step in this story. Luckily for me, for the book, or everyone, I think like he chose the second one, which is more complicated because it needs much more work, and it's not comfortable. I think it wouldn't be comfortable for me to go through things. But it was really, really interesting, like, getting notes from Joe and then back again, and it took us a lot of time to finally find, like, to get to the real final storyboard, like, and sometimes it wasn't that much about like, is the scene fun or not, but it was more about like, how's the feeling or how's the reader being taken from one scene together. And I'm sure you maybe agree that sometimes it's more just about the emotion. Am I taken properly from the beginning till the end, and does it feel right? And sometimes it's not very objective. It's like, well, I think we should have something like this, but I don't know why. It just feels right. And so we had the base, which was all the script, and so we were able to try things on top. We even like did like a final revision of the whole book once it was drawn. Again, like re-editing. So as far as like cost, performance, whatever, doesn't make any sense. But it was like we were just putting as many hours as we needed just to get to the point where we were confident that the final shape of the book was the most faithful to what Joe had felt inside.
And it's very nice that you say we, but all the hard work was Ken. It was Ken redrawing, Ken editing, Ken redrawing the re-edited. It was all him. So that's very nice of you.
No, not at all. But the funny thing is, like, if you look at the original, sometimes they don't look much like what we have on the book, because it's just like a puzzle of panels. But,
hasta ahora, más o menos, ¿tenéis alguna pregunta? ¿Hay alguna cosa que no se haya entendido muy bien? ¿Que lo comentamos o más o menos vais siguiendo? ¿Sí? ¿Sí? Vale. Another thing that I wanted to ask Joe was about the main character. We talked about this, but at one point I was kind of scared. I was reading it because I really didn't know where the story was going, and the main character was unsympathetic, to say, put it mildly. And so the one thing that struck me the most was how risky it was right now at this times that we're living to choose to tell such a story with such a difficult character to empathize with, and especially risky, I think, because I think readers nowadays tend to confuse the characters, the main characters, with the author's opinions or vision of the world. So I thought, how did you feel about this? And did you have that same feeling that I was having, that it was like a really risky move?
Yeah. I mean, when this first came into my brain, it was always just a father-son story that just happened to take place with this sort of backdrop of this cop who's maybe a little bit racist and maybe a little bit, it felt like a secondary element. But then as modern times came along and we finally got to working on the book, it took a much bigger position than intended. And when we were working on the book, Black Lives Matter, summer was happening, protests all over America, cops not anybody's favorite. It was challenging, and I was a little bit worried. But I mean, I wouldn't say we waited it out. It's still obviously very raw for a lot of people, and it's the politics are still there. But we went to great lengths to make sure that the story was about what it was meant to be about, and that all of the other elements were handled truthfully, but not where they would take over the story. And after we showed it to enough people, we felt confident that that was the case. But yeah, I'm waiting. I figure eventually the comments are going to come in and be like, whoa, Joe Kelly's a horrible, racist, homophobic, you know.
Did you get any backlash like right away or not?
No. I definitely had people, well, I read a couple of reviews that mostly were like, I don't like the father, I don't like the son, why am I reading this book? So I had a couple of those. Because in America, they came out as single issues first, which was not, it's not my preference, but the publisher likes to do it that way. I really think you need to read it as a book, because that is a very easy way to go. Like, wow, this guy's a raging asshole, and now I have to sit with him. Like, I don't know if I'm not watching Bad Lieutenant, right? Like, this is so. So I was definitely worried, but I feel like when people stick with it, they don't know why they like Sarge, but they kind of do. And then, and certainly Michael also, you know, like obviously they balance each other out to some degree, or their extremes. And then if you stick with it, it's like, oh, I see there's something happening here, and carries you here.
There's some redeeming qualities to the character, which is funny because you're not exactly sure, but you just kind of hint at them. But right. you really leave it to the reader to decide whether you're going to forgive the character or not.
Right. Well, that's very important to me because there's a term, I'm trying to remember, I just recently heard this term, and I can't remember what it was, but it was like, it's not apology porn, but it's something along those lines. And it was like, why are there so many stories about like angry white men getting a second chance or something? And I was like, oh, well, I just wrote a book like that. But it was always meant to be that father-son reconcile story. And so I tried to leave the rest of it open. I'm not condemning the police. I'm not excusing the police. I'm not saying anybody solved racism. I'm acknowledging, you know, I tried to leave all those things open. I don't think it's my place, certainly not for this kind of story, to say, this is what I think. I mean, obviously, you don't have to look too hard to figure out where my thoughts lie. But that's why you were saying before, like those themes are in there, but they're not the story. And hopefully what people take away is the bigger, you know, father-son story.
Did the political atmosphere change the story at all as you were working on it, or was it basically set the moment that
it only changed it to the degree that if we had put this book out 5 years ago, we would never have contacted Joe 𝗨𝗍 to say, you're a black man who likes crime stories and you're an editor, would you please read this and give us your thoughts? I would not have thought to do that 5 years ago, or 10 years ago, whatever. It probably was 5 years ago when we talked. And then I'm glad we did that, because Joe was approaching the book as an editor. He wasn't just coming in to say, oh, you have to change everything. And then when he had points, they were really well taken. So the changes that wound up being made in that process, I think helped the book, because if you put a burning spotlight on the wrong thing, then it destroys the reading experience. So it was useful. It was useful. And I'm glad we did it that way. In the same way that I'm glad that Ken went through and was very careful about, this helps the story, this is repetitive, this is boring, you know, etc. Like, you know, it was the right kind of editing. So yeah, it worked out okay.
I was thinking that again, I don't live in America, so of course I know things from the news, but like again, like part of the things discussed on the book, I know of them, but I don't think I have any authority to maybe tell people anything about it. But so how I have a slightly removed position from those issues, although if I were there, that would affect me in many ways. But to me, the point where I really was able to connect with the story was when we got to the most simple shape that could take, which is like what happens when there is somebody you love and you don't agree with that person, and how do you simply are able to reconcile that conflict. And that's something that we have in here, we have it everywhere. And it's never a comfortable thing to go through. And I think that the book overall, the character of Sarge are uncomfortable. That's what the case is. But I think that's the human element to it. It's an uncomfortable, you could say, conversation that might be due to have, right? So, and we're not really giving any answers as to, it should be one way or the other, but it's more maybe just putting the spotlight on that and being like, well, what do you do if you were in that situation? And again, I think I see, when I come visit Spain, I see all over the place. And it could be from, any point of view, like, as soon as it's very opposite to you, you're going to have that problem. And I think that's the beauty of the book. It's a human conflict and contradictory, those conflicted feelings you may have towards certain people.
Bueno, sí, yo creo que igual si tenéis alguna pregunta, alguno de vosotros para los autores, me ayudáis a mí también, porque si no tengo que pensar tantas cosas, pero ¿no? Nada, de momento.
¿Por qué inglés?
Es por su culpa, ¿no? Pues it's something that I was well, I love your style and your art. One of the things that I enjoyed the most about the character design was something that you also explained at the exercise at the end. I was like, I thought, I really picked on this, but it was probably very obvious. But it was the design of the car. It was kind of in the face of the immortal Sargent. So I really enjoyed that. And how did you? Just came organically to you?
I think so. Those are things that I don't think you're working on it. It's only it happens and it's fun and you keep it there. And for this book, like we could have gone for a more realistic style, but I think like overall it would have made it very more difficult to read, more difficult to get into. So the idea was like, well, we have a heavier story, then we're gonna have a lighter artwork, and so being able to put like small visual jokes and there also I think helped it make it at least more fun for me to draw, and I think it also like overall like the fact that it's a more simplified art style, art, I don't know how people would call it, but also is there to just like the way I see my role, it's like he had something to say and we want to bring it to readers, and so what I'm going to do is like I'm going to add something in the middle that's going to be the least intrusive and the best option out. The best that I can come up with. And in this case was like we just want something that an art style that would be light enough that you just start from the beginning and go to the end without stopping in the middle, hopefully. Like for example, like I like very much like when you have like a very elaborate like splash page or scenery, but sometimes I feel like that suddenly makes you stop on that page compared to the other. So I refrained in a way from doing those things, and it was like, no, it's just going to be like something very subdued. So it was more, again, it was something that came up while working on the storyboards. Like, well, how much do we need to render these things in order to get to the best reading experience, you could say, in a way. So we got there, and so I think like for me, gladly, I don't live in the States, so there are many things that I cannot. No, sorry, in the sense that, sorry, not in that sense at all. Oh my God. But no, it was more like, there are things that I'm not used to seeing. So I don't know what maybe like a doorknob looks like, or small things like that are maybe different. And so I was like, well, if it's a more simplified art style, then I can get away with that, because if it's contemporary, so it's more difficult. If it were like, I don't know, Western, 19th century, whatever, it might be a little bit easier to trick the reader. So, and I think that's something that I also did on 𝗨𝗃𝗃𝗀 Giants, where I had never been to the States until that point. So it was like, well, I'm going to look at pictures and hope that nobody says anything about the things not looking like they should. And I was lucky that time. But I guess like it's because it's not super realistic. If you have a realistic style, then you run into trouble.
I like that you point that out, because this was something I was thinking about as I was reading the book. I was so glad that you chose Ken to tell the story, because there's a tendency, I think, towards a more realistic style when dealing with more kind of realistic stories, and especially when crime in general, right? And writers have a tendency to go look at that guy who can, do very realistic faces, which I think would have subtracted from what they were trying to tell and explain. And it's something that sometimes gets lost. That's exactly what you were saying, that a more, I guess, the way that people understand it the most is the simplistic style is actually much better for the story many times.
Well, and it's so funny. I've always said this about you, even with 𝗨𝗀𝗃𝗃𝗀. It's like your line work it almost looks chaotic sometimes, but I know that he does so much design that every line is very intentional. And so when people look at it, it's like, oh, it looks like and it's done. I know, like, you agonize about, like, every line is perfect. So it takes a lot to draw simple, right? And you know that too, honestly. I know you. Yeah, you're terrible, horrible drawer. But the thing I love too is that it's the expressionism, right? So we can do things in comics that if you do them in live action, they just fall flat, or you have to come up with other ways. And because Ken's style has so much life, it allows for the humor and the emotion to come through. The car being a great example. Like, I can't picture in live action, how do you make Sarge look like the car, right? It's like, it doesn't work, but in the comic it works. Like, that they're connected. It's a strange thing. So, and we were talking about that, the introduction, the first time they see each other in the book, and Sarge is a giant and Michael is tiny, right? You could kind of fake that in live action, but it would look very, very forced, where in comics that is not the case. And we had the same experience with 𝗨𝗀𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃, where you can go along with that story, and my intention always was that it was up to the reader, was what happened in Barbara's mind, or was it real? Then we got to do the film, and we had to cut so many things because, like the director correctly said, like, if we put this in, it breaks the movie. And it was all the ambiguity and expressionism that we can do in comics. So this is the right medium to tell these kind of stories, but it's not the one people are used to. So it's so exciting to me when they get to see Ken's style on something serious and, like, heavy, because I think it's beautiful.
Also, I don't have any other style, so that's what we have. But I mean, overall, like, what I like about comics is that oftentimes, or the way I see it, it's like, it's not that much about what you have on paper. It's more about, like, what you're being able to paint, let's say, on the reader's mind. So, yeah. So, like, the way we're breaking the panel, the rhythm, and everything is just there to make, I don't know, the interpretation of the story more alive. And so, I think hopefully, the images you have in the mind are more, I don't know, alive than what do you have on the paper. That's kind of the way that's the only one way I have to say. So, anyway.
¿Qué? ¿Nos animemos o qué? ¿Una pregunta? Venga, va.
A ver, yo creo que he venido de esta gente, no he leído un cómic antes ni de Joe ni de Ken, y he visto que tanto Sargento Inmortal como Matagigantes son en blanco y negro. Quería preguntar si tiene alguna preferencia en particular, pues escribir cómics en blanco y negro, o es por algo simple artístico, estas dos obras, o es una costumbre en ellos.
Just want to know why it's black and white.
Yeah.
We can't afford color.
I don't know how to draw your
I think that when we first met, and we were talking about 𝗨𝗨𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃, Ken said, I can draw this book, but I have to do it in a manga style and black and white so that I can finish, because it's a lot of work. And at the time, it was his first professional job, and you hadn't done anything that long before. So that just, to my mind, became the style. But you can obviously color.
No, that's pretty much it. Like, I love manga, so in a way, I don't know. There are many things, like I love comics in color, for sure. But when it comes to drawing them, I have so much, I don't know, I have a hard time. I don't know why. Like if it's in black and white, it feels more intuitive in a way. Like I don't know why. I tend to get more easily into the story. If it's in color, I'm talking about like making them, not reading them. But like I have to think so much about like, I don't know, like the color scheme, and it's so much trouble. And I think sometimes it just gets your way. I don't know. There's something that I find difficult, which is like, because sometimes I do illustration when they look more like animation. Like I might tend to do comics in color that look more like animation, but I'm like, no, this is actually a comic, it's not animation. And so the moment you do them in black and white, you're being able to like, I don't know, dig deeper into the real language of, like if you have like a very expressionistic drawing and you have to color it sometimes, you're going to have to make choices. It's kind of like the movies, like, okay, so now what color is this thing, but I don't know what it is exactly. And so it's sometimes more intuitive. And I just like that idea of like we do comics, and actually comics you can make them with just a piece of paper and a pen, and that's it. And which is basically the same thing we've had since we were kids, and it's the same thing that pretty much everyone uses whenever they want to create something. If I'm gonna write a song, or I'm gonna make a groceries list, or anything, everything begins with a piece of paper and pen or pencil. And so we are lucky enough that we're able to work with those same materials, very humble materials, like throughout our career. And so there is that very primary mixture of like images and text that sometimes happens whenever we're like making, I don't know, talking on the phone and making a weird doodle, that we can still have in comics. And I don't know, it feels more natural in a way. I've done comics in color for sure, for Marvel or others, but like I'm always like conflicted somehow. And yet as a reader, I'm cool with it. Like I can read any comic in color, but like I don't know, making them, I still haven't been able to understand exactly how I want things to feel. It doesn't reply your answer, but sorry, that's what we got. Sorry.
Res més? Una altra pregunta? No?
We don't come this way often, so if you have questions, now's the time.
Es el momento de hacer la pregunta. Si no? Okay, so I think this might be it. Maybe it's time for you to sit down and do some signatures, some drawings.
Good. Well, thank you all so much for coming. I'm sorry I don't know Spanish yet. Maybe next time. I will work on it.
Dice que os da las gracias de haber venido aquí.
No.
Gracias.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
Y eso es todo. Te esperamos en un próximo vídeo. No olvidéis de seguirnos en nuestras redes sociales para no perderte nada.